Hello, welcome back. In this video, I am talking about a form of communism called Modernist communism, as it appeared in China in the early 1960s, right after the Great Leap Forward. If you remember, the Great Leap Forward occurred in China from about 1958 to 1961. It was based on massive grassroots mobilization to try to industrialize the economy as fast as possible. It had been a complete disaster and led to a very, very serious famine in which tens of millions of people had starved to death. Once the extent of the disaster was recognized by China's top policymakers, the Great Leap Forward was called to a halt, and actually Mao, who had instigated this campaign, took a step back from running the day-to-day affairs of the party. It's very often assumed that Mao was in complete control at all times, but in fact he wasn't. And this was a moment when he did actually take a back seat. And the running of day-to-day affairs of the Communist Party was handed over to Liu Shaoqi, and he was working closely with his ally in the party, Deng Xiaoping. Unlike Mao, who we can consider as a kind of radical communist, Liu and Deng, we can think of them as taking on a much more modernist communist kind of approach to running party affairs. And the first thing that they did was re-centralize the economy. So it was based much more, again, on top-down planning rather than grassroots bottom-up mobilization. They sent out government officials to the countryside who were highly educated, urban, technocratic planners who were going to run things very differently from those who had been loyal to Mao and who they were then taking over from. These new replacement managerial style policymakers were not interested at all in the kind of bottom-up mass mobilization that Mao had been promoting. Their main focus was getting economic growth going again and getting the production of food going again. And to achieve that, they didn't mind so much if a little bit of inequality started to emerge in the countryside. So within the communes, these large collective farms, which is how agricultural production was at the time organized, they allowed some households to set up their own individual plots of land on the side to grow their own produce and to start selling some of that privately on the markets, and thereby creating a little bit of private wealth for themselves. This was really good for getting food production going again, but it was incredibly controversial because you started to see limited forms of inequality in wealth emerging in the countryside. Now, if you're a radical kind of communist, of the kind that was loyal to Mao, this is considered very, very threatening, because if you have small wealth inequalities or class difference starting to emerge in the countryside, then possibly those with a bit more wealth might start to ally with capitalists or even capitalist imperialist interests outside China, who might then come in, recolonize China or semi-colonize China, and drag China back to its past when it had been dominated by multiple imperialist powers. This is why wealth inequalities in the countryside is considered to be a very, very bad and in fact dangerous thing. And what's more, these urban, educated, technocratic government officials, now that they're in the countryside, they're not very familiar with how things are run in the countryside. So quite often, for help, they would turn to the former rich peasants, the former local landlords, very often people who had actually been dispossessed or overthrown in the anti-landlord campaigns that had been going on until the early 1950s. So again, very worrying if you're a radical kind of communist and you start to see what looks like a potential alliance forming between urban technocratic elites and former landlords. It's starting to look like a possible capitalist class alliance here. So, while the economy was actually starting to recover at this point, perhaps unsurprisingly, this way of managing the economy and managing party affairs didn't last particularly long. And in 1966, very concerned by all these inequalities that are emerging, Mao launched the Cultural Revolution. And I'll talk about that in my next video. Thank you for watching.